2009 թվականի համաշխարհային ֆինանսական ճգնաժամից հետո Հայաստանի տնտեսությունը երրորդ տարին շարունակ գրանցում է աճ։ Այս մասին ասված է Արժույթի Միջազգային Հիմնադրամի գործադիր խորհրդի կողմից փետրվարի 5-ին հրապարակված հաշվետվությունում։ Եվ Գործադիր տնօրենները գովեստով են խոսում Հայաստանի իշխանությունների տնտեսական ու ֆինանսական քաղաքականության մասին։ Ըստ հաշվետվության աստիճանաբար կայունանում է ճգնաժամից առաջ աճի գործոն դարձած շինարարության բնագավառը։ 2012 թվականին բյուջեի պակասուրդը նախորդ տարվա համեմատ կրճատվել է, բանկային սեկտորը մնում ուժեղ։ Ճգնաժամի տարիներին այն ցուցաբերել է ճկունություն եւ այժմ էլ բավականին ճկուն է տնտեսական որևէ ցնցման դեպքում։ Այս մասին Ամերիկայի ձայնին Արժույթի Միջազգային Հիմնադրամի կենտրոնակայանում տրված հարցազրույցում ասում է ֆինանսական սեկտորի գնահատումների ծրագրի ղեկավար Ջենիֆեր Էլիոտը։
How often does IMF assess Armenia's financial sector?
So the work that we did here is very in-depth look at the financial sector. We don't do it every year. Every year we go and do a general look at the economy, something called an Article 4 visit. This is a more in-depth thing, and it's done in some countries, systemically important countries, every 5 years, but in the case of Armenia, not quite as frequently, but at the request of the authorities. The last one we did was in 2005.
What are the main findings in IMF's assessment of Armenia's financial sector?
Mainly we saw a financial sector, a banking sector that was resilient to the crisis and still looks quite resilient to future shocks as we could see them. We made a number of recommendations for improvements, which is what we do. We take a look at how banking supervision is done, how the framework works, how the legal framework works, and we made a number of recommendations. The biggest risk that we saw was if there would be foreign exchange troubles in the banks. There's a low risk of a shock to the currency, and if that were to occur, there was some need to make the banks a little bit more able to withstand that kind of shock.
Explain please the reasons behind Armenia's banking system's resiliency.
It's a very small banking system relative to the size of the economy, which always helps. So in a crisis, when something, the wind is coming, it helps that it's a smaller system, and that's the chief reason. Another big reason was the banks weren't really exposed to the construction sector, and you probably know that in 2009 that was one of the sectors that really took a hit. So the banks were actually quite resilient to that. Another reason would be that the banks are deposit funded, and so many countries experience problems with their banks because funding markets, those who lend through securities markets to banks, kind of collapse, but that's not the case in Armenia.
Okay, what challenges lie ahead for Armenia's economy?
Well, I could talk a little bit about the financial sector and not so much about the general economy. We do have today coming out our annual staff report on the general economy, and my colleagues who work on that team would have quite a lot to say in detail. For the financial sector, the challenges will continue to be, as they are in many places, profitability and withstanding any future slowing of growth, say coming from Europe, coming from Russia. Those are really the challenges for the banking sector. But I could say that one of the challenges that the Armenian financial sector faces is how to broaden out past banks. So how do we have a capital market that works a little better? One thing we looked at was insurance, for example. There's no life insurance offered, and we made some recommendations about improving the framework or environment if that should happen. Another thing you have coming in Armenia is pension reform, and so there's a challenge there about what will those pension dollars be invested in, and how can we make that as safe as possible for Armenians.
Your assessment, please, of Armenian government's ability to navigate through the global financial crisis.
I should have mentioned this before when we talked about why the banking sector was resilient. In fact, one of the reasons was for the swift policy action that the Armenian government took and the central bank took to provide liquidity to banks and to make sure that confidence wasn't totally eroded. That was extremely important. So the ability to do that is really important and led to some success. We made a bunch of recommendations about how to improve that. Since the crisis globally, we've learned quite a bit about what it is that a country needs to have in place to face banks that are in trouble, and so there are a number of technical recommendations made about that.
So what did you suggest them to do?
Things like a deposit guarantee fund that's a little bit more modern and is able to act quicker, better coordination between the ministry and the central bank so that everybody's on the same page and is able to act quickly. Most of our recommendations are about that, are about the ability to do things very quickly, which is...
Does the Armenian government take this all into account, your suggestions?
Yes,
very
absolutely.
Quickly?
Absolutely. Actually, it's been really nice because since we've been on the mission, quite a number of things have been done. I talked about the foreign exchange risk in banks, and a liquidity rule has been put in that says that a bank has to have a number of dollars sitting there as well as drams in case of a liquidity shortage. Also, the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank have signed a memorandum of understanding about crisis, which is one of our recommendations. So we've been really pleased by that.
Mrs. Elliott, thank you very much again. And would you like to add anything?
No, thank you very much for having me. This is really a pleasure.
Thanks again.
Okay.